Hello and welcome to Parimatch News Weekly podcast. I am your host Sarthak Karkhanis, and today we are going to preview the India versus England Test series, which is going to start on the 5th of February in Chennai. So in this podcast we are going to preview the India's preparations for the England series, which will include how they have selected the squad, who all might make it to the playing 11, and of course who are the players to watch out for. So let's get it started. India are coming on a back of a historic series win in Australia. Of course, that was a very eventful series. The first test to India crashed to a 36 all out and they were defeated, and it was a humiliating defeat. Post that test, there were a lot of injuries, and injuries were, of course, pretty much an integral part of the tour, and it was every match India faced injury issues, and there were a lot of changes post every match. So that was one of the issues. Then Virat Kohli returned to India because of the birth of his first child post the first test, and Ajinkya Rahane took over the reins. MCG second test, India's greatest ever victory, as we could all say, or the fourth test where at the Gabba, where India breached Fortress Gabba. Australia hadn't lost in 32 years at Brisbane, and there they went and just beyond all imagination. It was basically a very filmy event, as we say in India. The third test, of course, was also a very eventful one where India grabbed a draw from the jaws of defeat, and on the final day they batted to save the test match and of course that kept the series alive. Now, a lot of focus coming into this series was how India would select the squad, because the test match players who actually were the key in India's victory were not in the squad. They were net bowlers. They were not a part of the playing 11 in the first test. They were in the preferred players who played the first test. So there was a problem of plenty. So what are the changes actually? And we will start one by one. Of course, T. Natarajan will not be a part of the squad. He has gone to see his daughter. He hadn't seen his daughter, and having played in all the three formats in Australia, he has been rested and won't be a part of this of this series versus England, or at least the first two tests the squad has been declared. Then Mohammad Shami, Ravindra Jadeja, Hanuma Vihari and Umesh Yadav are the ones who have still not recovered from injuries, so they won't be a part of the first two tests again. Other than that, Hardik Pandya will be one of the key players, or a player who always attracts a lot of attention, but here he will attract more attention because he will be playing tests for the first time since 2018. He played his last test in England, the fifth test, which India unfortunately lost, but he last played in England in 2018. So after a gap of 2.5 years, Hardik Pandya will be playing in the whites, and this time he has been selected as a specialist batsman. We will come on that later, and we will discuss whether he might or might not make the playing 11. But Virat, then come to the players who will be returning, and Ishant Sharma, Virat Kohli, Jasprit Bumrah and Ravichandran Ashwin. Ishant was of course ruled out of the entire tour of Australia. Virat Kohli, as we already mentioned, was back to India because of the birth of his first child, and Bumrah and Ashwin missed out on the fourth test after they were injured at Sydney. So that is something where India will be very happy, because now they are almost playing a full strength side. As we already mentioned, Ravindra Jadeja will be missing out on the squad, and he is injured and is yet to recover from that dislocated thumb injury, and that's why there was a lot of talk about who his replacement will be, because he has been that vital cog in the Indian side for almost half a decade now, and there were quite a few options. There was Shahbaz Nadeem, who has been a domestic stalwart in Indian cricket for 10 to 15 years, or Jalat Saxena, who hasn't yet got that India call up in spite of being consistent over the years in the Ranji Trophy, or even Akshar Patel, who in the last 2 seasons has better numbers than someone like Shahbaz Nadeem. And Akshar and Shahbaz Nadeem have both are both like considered as like for like replacements for Jadeja. The selectors have given a go ahead to Akshar Patel, who led his side Gujarat to the semi-finals of the Ranji Trophy and has been in a good form, as we mentioned, a couple of years now. So he will be playing. Other than that, KL Rahul will be returning in the squad for the second test in Chennai only. So that is how the squad has been picked for the test series versus England. Now, when it comes to the playing 11, we can say that Rohit Sharma, Shubman Gill, we will talk about them later as well, but they are set at the top by how they have played. Rohit Sharma not quite among the runs. He looked in good touch in Australia, and in India he already showed what kind of a potential he has when he scored that double century versus South Africa and also 100. So he has really showed how good he has been as an opener in India at least. Then number 3 Cheteshwar Pujara, number 4 Virat Kohli, number 5 Ajinkya Rahane. So post that Australia series where Ajinkya Rahane actually led the Indian side to the victory, he will now be back to his original position at number 5 and will also be the vice captain. So, and of course Ajinkya Rahane is one of our players to watch out for, because he hasn't quite been the same Ajinkya Rahane since 2016, and numbers have reflected that. In India he hasn't been up to the mark, and in Australia as well he captained beautifully, but other than that knock at the MCG, he hasn't quite been that sort of a guy who the Indian team can look up to and say that give me the runs, because someone like Virat Kohli, or to some extent how Cheteshwar Pujara has been, Ajinkya Rahane hasn't been that sort of a guy. But in India, he has the cushion of Rishabh Pant, an in-form Rishabh Pant at one side and Virat Kohli at the other. So between them, Ajinkya Rahane can really make use and play how he wants in this series. So number 5 is Ajinkya Rahane. Number 6 will be Rishabh Pant, considering how well he played in Sydney as well as Brisbane. And then we come to the bowlers. Remember, we are skipping number 7 and we will talk about that later. And there will be the 4 bowlers, Ravichandran Ashwin, Jasprit Bumrah, Ishant Sharma and Mohammad Siraj. With the pitch expected to be a green top in Chennai, a very unlikely or a very astonishing decision, because Chennai we usually think that it will be a rank turner. Of course, 2016 England, the 5th and final test, the pitch wasn't quite like how it can be, but it was a flat one, and India really did well on the 5th day to inflict an innings defeat. Or 2013 versus Australia, the pitch was a rank turner, but here it is expected to be a green top one, and that's why we expect that India will play the 3 seamers and the senior pro in Ishant Sharma, Jasprit Bumrah and Mohammad Siraj, of course, having led the Indian bowling attack so well in Australia. We expect him to be here. Other than that, so Ravichandran Ashwin is of course a certainty, and for obvious reasons he has close to 400 wickets, and in India you can't find a better bowler than him in this era. So now we come to number 7, and India actually have a lot of options. So we try to decode them and let's see what they have actually got in the options. Now, will they play someone like a Shardul Thakur? That's one option, because he was the one who played really well in Brisbane, where he batted well, he scored that 50 and bowled well as well. He picked up 7 wickets, took 2 catches, became the only Indian to do all of this in one overseas test. So he is one option. Then his mate, who actually reignited India's hopes of staying and made sure India were alive at the Gabba test, Washington Sundar. Again, he bowled well, picked the all-important wicket of Steven Smith in the first innings. With his off-spin at his home ground alongside Ravichandran Ashwin, can be one of those bowlers who will be very crucial, and of course has the batting prowess. Of course, you can say that his 6 was the one which changed the momentum completely in India's favour. So that can be one of the options for India. So Washington Sundar and other than that, Shardul Thakur are the options we have discussed. Then there is also a possibility of playing someone like Ridhiman Saha, because Rishabh Pant's keeping wasn't up to the mark, and Rishabh Pant's keeping hasn't been his forte. But then there is this debate whether he's a 23-year-old, and sometime in the future Rishabh Pant has to be keeping for in all three formats for India. Sooner than later, it is going to happen. So why not now in a series where actually the bowlers will create too many chances, the batsmen can put up too many runs, and looking at India's strength at home, this is his chance to develop. So why not Rishabh Pant only? But then there is an option where you can say that the against a side like England, who has Joe Root, Ben Stokes, James Anderson, Stuart Broad, and all these stalwarts, and they can put up a very spirited performance in India. These small chances may matter, so that can be a debate. But Ridhaman Saha is indeed an option to bat at number 7 and play as a specialist wicket keeper. Then comes another option, like someone like Akshar Patel, who is a like for like replacement for Jadeja. Now, when we say like for like replacement for Jadeja, you might argue that he isn't someone a big turner of the ball, but he can add those runs lower down the order with the Indian tail. So he can be a great option there. And of course, then there is Hardik Pandya, who can play as a specialist batsman and add the runs. And of course, with four bowlers, do you really need a fifth bowler? And Virat Kohli has been someone who has gone with the fifth bowler. But then in India, there can be a new combination that they might try out. And again, the next Indian tour will be in England. Hardik Pandya's all-round ability is the seam bowling all-rounder. Right now, he is perhaps the only commodity who can come to close to test. So he is one of those players who will be crucial for India leading up to this. And he can be one of those players as we mentioned. So then here comes Hardik Pandya, and then why not try out his bat in this series? Then we already mentioned how we will be covering the players to watch out for in this series from both this side. And here we go. So Virat Kohli, he had a lackluster 2020. By his standards, he didn't even get 100 in any of the format of the game. You can argue that he was out of the game for quite a while, 5 months without cricket, but then it is Virat Kohli. He got many opportunities at the start of the year as well in Bangalore versus Australia. Then, of course, in the New Zealand Test, he had a very disappointing series, or in the ODI versus New Zealand, he didn't perform well. Then comes to the Australian tour, where he wasn't really up to the mark, and of course that Adelaide Test, the first innings was perhaps the best innings he had played in a while, or perhaps the best non-100 innings in his career. But an unfortunate run out is something where he lost his momentum, and of course other than that he just played one inning. In the ODIs he came close once, of course in the T20s he came close once when he was dismissed on 85 in the 18th or 19th over of the game. So that is something where you will argue that Virat Kohli really would have done something. But in 2020 he has to leave behind that year, of course, like all of us, and he has to play well in 2021. This is of course his first assignment, and then he will be playing England against James Anderson, Stuart Broad, Dominic Bess and Jack Leach, and attack and Jofra Archer as well. So he really likes these challenges, but he might not keep an eye on the stats. But there is a stat that he has gone 30 innings without a century for India. The previous run of this sorts was again 30 innings. This is the joint longest he has gone without a century for India. And he might not keep an eye on these stats, but he certainly knows that this is the longest, or he hasn't scored a century in a while for India. The last was of course in the day-night test versus Bangladesh on the 23rd of November 2019. So that is of course a while since he has got that 100. So one of the players to watch out for in this series. Other than that, his nemesis James Anderson has a strike rate of 70, uh, always he has been criticized as someone who hasn't performed in India. Other than one test at the Eden Gardens, he hasn't really been that sort of a giant as he has been in English cricket. The story in India is completely different. So, four tests, and is coming off a 6 for versus Sri Lanka. So, in the second test. So you can expect that James Anderson will be the person who will be really, really itching to go on what might be his last tour of India. 600 wickets, has a chance to certainly cross the and become Anil Kumble in his own country, and become the third highest wicket taker in the history of Test cricket. So again, one of the players to watch out for. Ben Stokes and Joe Root are the next players who will be one to watch out for. Joe Root, he has been criticized a lot for how he has really not converted his 50s to 100. Has been that sort of a player who really has not got the daddy 100. And come Sri Lanka, he was in scintillating form for England in both the test matches, was the pillar of England's batting, led from the front. So coming into this series, versus spin, he is England's best, one of the best players of spin in the world right now. So really, one of the players again to watch out for. And Ben Stokes as well. The all-round capability, the stats don't quite reflect his genius, and he last time he toured India he was a good player but not a great player how he has turned out to be post the 2019 World Cup or post the Ashes 2019. So he can bowl those long spells, and of course can be one of those players who can really stick to his line and length if he finds that early. Can be a really crucial player for England in this series. Now coming to the Indian players, there is one English player which we will discuss, but now we will discuss more Indian players, and then Ishant Sharma. It has been a career of two halves for Ishant Sharma, and we can expect that post injury it will be very interesting to see how Ishant Sharma will feature in this Indian team, because remember, now that Ishant Sharma was out, there were players like Shardul Thakur, Mohammad Siraj, and when Mohammad Shami comes back as well, there were players, these two players at least, and of course T Natarajan. These three players were the one who were really impressive. So now if Ishant Sharma doesn't perform in these two tests, will the team management say that, you know what, we shouldn't actually consider Ishant Sharma, and there is a backup option available, which has happened to quite a few players in the past under this team management. So let's see what happens. But right now, Ishant Sharma, of course, he is one of those players to watch out for. He has to perform as well in this series. Jasprit Bumrah as well, 3 years since his debut, still hasn't played a test match in India. India hasn't really played the big opponents. They have played West Indies, they have played Bangladesh, they have played Sri Lanka, but they haven't played the big opponents, and that's why Jasprit Bumrah has always been rested. And there were calls for him being rested in this test series as well, because considering there is a T20 World Cup later this year, there is an IPL, so you shouldn't overburden Jasprit Bumrah in a series where there are good options available. So let's see. But considering that this series is very much crucial from the World Test Championship point of view, we can say that Jasprit Bumrah playing this series is pretty much justified. And other than that, now we did mention about how there can be a lot of options for number 7, and we did not mention one name deliberately, and that was of Kuldeep Yadav. Kuldeep Yadav didn't play, hasn't really been a permanent feature of this test side. 4 years since his debut, he has only featured in 6 tests. He has been impressive. He was impressive in his debut. He was impressive in the Sydney 2019 test, which was the fourth and final test of the 2018-19 Border Gavaskar Trophy. And post that win, Ravi Shastri actually mentioned how he is their number one away spinner. But India played their next test match 6 months later. Until that time, Kuldeep Yadav had lost his rhythm, or you can say that the team management actually mixed formats and didn't quite give Kuldeep Yadav the opportunity. But in the absence of Ravindra Jadeja, he can be the second spinner for India, or maybe they can even test Ravichandran Ashwin in one of the test matches and Kuldeep Yadav may come in. So he is one of those players to watch out for. Now the opening combination, Rohit Sharma and Shubman Gill. The last time India played a home series versus Bangladesh, and in the last home season versus South Africa, Rohit Sharma and Mayank Agarwal were seen as the long-term opening combination. But then what has happened post that is that Mayank Agarwal didn't quite have two good test matches in Australia, and now they dropped him for someone like Rohit Sharma, who was coming back of injury and was given the incumbent opener position. Shubman Gill did well in the test series, and after that 91 at the Gabba on the final day, he isn't going to be dropped. So this is the combination, an attacking combination, the bat with intent, and one of the two of the players to watch out for. And the last England player, which we will mention, is Jofra Archer, has had a great start to his test career in the Ashes. Then he played for England, but was rested in the Sri Lanka series. But in the subcontinent, with his pace and he can be relentless in his line and length. He will be one of those England players to watch out for as well. That's it on today's podcast. We discussed a lot of topics and hope you liked it. Do subscribe to Parimatch News and do keep listening to our podcast. Thanks a lot and goodbye.